What's going on, guys? So I got the new build action going here. Been slowly chipping away at this since January of this year, 2024, which, considering the fact that I started this project with 4 pieces of metal on a table and a pile of tubing and an engine and wheels and tires, 4.5 months or so, 5 months is really been nothing to build a bike from scratch. So this is a fairly big bike, especially for a chopper. Well, we got a 18 by 300 rear. This tire is actually a 310 from this particular manufacturer. It's a 10.5-inch wide wheel. Obviously rigid frame, old school style. Springer front end, which is 2 inches over, and a 23 front, which kept that fork at a 2 over. If it was at the 21, it probably would have been the 4 over. But with the 23, you get the taller axle height. And I actually set this rake on this particular bike fairly shallow for a chopper at 35 degrees because I was trying to keep the handling in mind. I think 35 is probably more like bobber rake. But what I did was stretch the frame right in this area, stretched over what typical factory frame dimensions would be, which still lets you have that high front end because you're getting the seat down. And then with the 23 and that taller axle, I was, like I said, able to keep this to only 2 over. So it should handle fairly well. I mean, just rolling it around the shop and in and out, it actually moves fairly easy for the size of it. It actually moves around easier than other smaller bikes I've worked on. But anyway, I just finished up these pipes 2 days ago. They turned out to be some of the more favorite ones that I've made from scratch. 1 3/4 all the way through. Still gonna make some custom tips for them and some heat shields probably right in this area. I had to make my own header flanges, head tubes on this too because they didn't make, I couldn't find any readily available on the aftermarket, and they're different from Harley Evo style too. And that being said, so this is a 1700cc, which is 102 Roadstar engine. It's a 2004 carbureted, and these are really good engines. They're twin cam from the factory with I should say twin cam with a factory gear drive, not chain driven. 8 valves and 2 spark plugs per cylinder. There's a lot of them that have logged over 250,000 miles already with no teardown. And once I got into the Roadstar community, which a lot of guys gave me a lot of valuable information on what I was going to do or trying to do with this build. The more I learned about them, the more happy I was that I went this route. And another thing that was a big thing for this build was on this side, they're a gear-driven transmission. So you've got no big primary hanging out here for the weight and all that. But also, there's no belt or no chain to have to worry about adjusting or stuff breaking, the tensioner breaking or whatever. And it's very compact and very strong. Now, these did come with a mid-drive transfer case right here from the factory on the factory Roadstar bikes, which is actually what that mounting flange was for. And I found out once I got into this community that you can delete that entire mid-drive case. It basically held part of the engine oil, and it also turned the bike into a left side drive belt final drive. I definitely wanted to run a chain. But the other issue I had was having to offset my drive line, chain line, to clear this big tire. And originally, I had made two of these, and I say two because the first one I made wrong. I actually wound up having my offset 3/32 of an inch off. And how I did it, I still have no idea, because I'm usually a measure 4 times, cut once kind of guy, and I still got it wrong. So this was the second one, and this was going to mount right in there where the factory transfer case was. And then after I made this, I decided not to. I didn't want to put all this extra weight back in the bike just to offset the chain. Plus, I would have had to run 2 chains, which is one from the engine to this inside one, and then the second one from this outside one to the rear sprocket. And I've done that on a bike in the past. I didn't really want to do it again. Another guy I had talked to said, you can just run a sprocket direct off the engine transmission case, which these here, they use the same output shaft as an R1. So I went ahead and just made, I say just made like I whipped it up just like that. But really it was kind of a headache, because I had to make an offset, this same offset, and that's where the original sprocket chain line would have been, is that inside one. And here's the offset one for the chain to clear the tire. And I wound up making this outer bearing support for that, because once you add that much offset, that chain's actually pulling on that at like the 10 o'clock position, and you would prematurely wear out or destroy that inner case bearing, which I didn't want to do, putting it under that load that it's not meant to have. So this plate here actually has a 1-inch steel bar shaft welded to it on the inside, right there. And that goes inside that bore. And then I found a 1-inch ID flanged bearing and massaged that piece of 1/4-inch wall DOM tubing for that bearing to sit in, and that piece of steel bar stock shaft goes in that bearing. And then I made these 3 legs, which bolt down, actually bolt right here to some bungs I made, but then those weld down to a plate on the transmission case. So when that torques this way, it's now actually being transferred to this, which is being transferred to the outside of the transmission case and not stressing that bearing. That took care of the offset, and that was one of the last major hurdles I had to get past. I mean, as if building a whole frame from scratch wasn't enough for an uncommon engine. And I'm going to post the build process in photos after the video, and you'll see all of that. But the old frame that this started out was, it was a 2008 Pro Street style frame set up for the 300, which is how I even wound up running a 300. And it came with an MSO, and it had the VIN number. I got a really good deal on it though, and that's why I snatched it up. And then I started building it, and come to find out that whoever designed and built that frame, they set the rear ride height, which is axle to the ground, with the ground clearance at only 2 3/4 of an inch. And I didn't know at the time because I had bought a bare frame. But when I got the rear wheel and tire and put it in there with the axle, I immediately saw it. And I was like, well, I guess we're scrapping this frame, which is actually now in a pile over here. This was like the original down tube. There's the seat post tubes and the tranny plate that was on there. It was actually set up for a right side drive transmission and an Evo engine. So I wound up scrapping that, and I kept 4 pieces, which was the 2 rear axle blocks, because they were nice machine pieces. And I kept the peg bar, this square peg bar right here, because it's got the VIN number in it. And I kept the steering head too, because it was a nice internal stop head tube. It was already machined for internal stop. So I kept that. And of course, cleaned it up and welded, basically grafted it into this new frame, which also it's all 1.5-inch 120 wall DOM, with the exception of the down tube. The down tube I used 1 3/4. So all really beefy stuff for a bike. I think 1 3/8 is the biggest most guys are using as a common size. So anyway, that's where I'm at now. I made the bars too, made the oil tank, and these engines are half dry sump like a Harley. The only difference being is they run 1/2-inch ID lines, oil lines, instead of 3/8. I made this tank so that I could get all the outlets, the fill cap and the inlet and outlet where I wanted them. These engines, the oil vents, the crankcase vents, I should say, through the engine. But that being said, there's no Harley tanks are usually 3 lines. One is a feed, one's a return, one's a vent. These you only have to run 2. And like I said, 1/2-inch ID lines. The original transfer case that these engines had also held the engine oil, but I deleted that, as I had mentioned, and I wanted this anyway for more of the old school look. So I will keep you updated on how the rest of this build goes. I'm really close to firing it. My next main thing is battery box, and this is all still getting sheet metaled in on both sides. And I'm going to go ahead and put all the electronics in there, the coils, the electronic ignition for the engine, start button, the keyed ignition, all in there. So that'll keep that all tidy. And I pre-drilled this frame already to run the wire up for the headlight. And that's about, it's not going to take much at this point to get it fired up. But as I have time, alright guys, I will keep you posted.